to hear somebody intelligent and sober and uh, maybe somebody that you respect or somebody that you admire or even just somebody that you don't think is a crackpot, to hear somebody say, I think we should defund the police, it demands that you engage with that. You might not agree with it. You might hear them out and not agree with their conclusions, but it's such a provocative thing to say in America right now that I think it demands engagement, and I think that's valuable.
Uh, let's begin. My guy, I really liked that video that you made. I watched it twice just to make everything sink in. But before we get like deep into the nitty gritty, go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone, and we can go from there.
Sounds good. So, my name is Phil. I go by ThatDangPhil on Twitter and have a YouTube channel called That Dang Dad. Um, and started out doing videos about a year ago when my daughter was born, and I was up late, just hanging out, reading stuff, watching stuff, and I've always liked, talking about politics and sociology and psychology and stuff like that. So, started staying up late, making videos for fun, and it was just a small channel. No one, had 30 subscribers, and then I did a video where I revealed that I was a former police officer, and a YouTuber named Thought Slime. I submitted it to his little eyeball zone thing, and he put it out to the masses and had a huge burst of attention after that. And now things have been going pretty good. Now people are asking me to come on streams and talk to them, and it's been pretty cool. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, like definitely no. I've only started streaming recently too, about back in March or April, sometime around then. Um, so uh, do you mostly do videos about your time as a cop, or is it kind of varied on what you talk about?
I actually almost never do videos about cop
Oh no,
stuff.
oh no.
I don't. I don't love. It's not my favorite time in my personal history, and did a lot of things I wasn't real proud of. And nobody likes cops, and people in leftist circles do not trust cops or
Right, right.
ex-cops, nor should they. So it's not something that I love to just throw around because I know it. Invites a lot of scrutiny that sometimes isn't fun, but during the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests, it was something where I kept seeing these protests and I kept seeing these videos of just horrendous police brutality against protesters, and I don't know what it was about the 2020 protests, why it hit me different. Maybe I was just far enough out of law enforcement, but I was just watching it and I kept thinking like, this is so wrong. This is so awful. And I just kept feeling it really weighing on me to say something about it. So that's why I made the initial video, and then it got such interest that I made a couple other videos. But I do everything from stuff about movies, stuff about books, stuff about fatherhood. Ostensibly my channel is about being a new dad, and sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. Sometimes I talk about masculinity and what it means to sort of navigate the world as a man from a non-toxic perspective. And I was recently in management, so I talk about business stuff too. How to behave in business. I did a video about, hey, maybe us managers shouldn't be going to conferences and trying to sleep with all the interns. What a concept.
Really quick, I can hear an echo. Can you turn the oh, maybe it's just when it's activating from your voice.
Yeah, let me try. Maybe I'll put on headphones.
Um, Let me see here. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Diving into like masculinity is something that I'm probably going to be uh looking into talking about more now that the election is over. Because I mean, that's taken up everyone's time on politics on Twitch. So, but I really want to kind of my whole thing is trying to reach out to um, disaffected young white men who don't really have that identity. They see, Black Lives Matter. Why can't I be proud of being white? Like those sorts of kids. The kinds of edgy 17 to 19-year-old kids that are making fun of, like, making the attack helicopter jokes. So, so masculinity is probably going to be something that I talk about quite a bit, moving forward. So my roommate introduced me to that video. I have no idea how he came across it, but I found it really, really cool how you were able to very succinctly, like, the three different ways that they teach you to dehumanize people, right? Do you think that is, like, nationwide, or do you think that that's it, like, indicative, or like, do you think that is something that is more to do with specific police stations, or just like a nationwide culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. By the way, is my audio better? Can you hear me?
Oh yeah,
No echo?
significantly better.
Beautiful. Yeah, so I worked in a pretty busy area in Southern California in Los Angeles County, and I worked with a lot of surrounding agencies, LA County sheriffs, lots and lots of other agencies out in Southern California. Did lots of trainings. I was really involved in martial arts and Krav Maga, and went to a lot of law enforcement seminars where I interacted with a lot of other cops from all over. And every cop I ever met, I feel like we all talked the same way, if that makes sense. We all kind of had the same vibe, and we talked about people the same way. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying that in my opinion, this is endemic to law enforcement as a culture in the United States. Now, there might be, and I'm sure there are, some little small towns in Mayberry, USA, and maybe there are little places that is not the dominant culture. And I know there are police officers for whom that is not their personal dominant culture. But everyone I ever interacted with, it just really feels like that was part of the whole landscape of law enforcement, at least in my experience.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that a lot of times when especially during the George Floyd protests, when I was talking to conservatives, because everyone loves to jump on stream and argue with a lefty, they would always say, well, this is just a problem in the big cities. This isn't really a problem in small town USA. There everyone gets along. It's just these inner city blacks, and I always, that always sat wrong with me. But, I don't have any experience as a cop. And oftentimes, one other streamer who has been on this channel several times before, he would always say, you really just can't speak on this. Like, you have no idea about this kind of police culture if you've never been a part of it, or if no one in your family has had a part in it. So I think it's important for people to hear and to understand that it's kind of a dominant culture. There are maybe some smaller areas where it's not, but yeah.
Yeah, and the city that I worked was 95% Hispanic, first and second generation immigrant. And so, you would often hear during, I think Black Lives Matter, I think that came out of Ferguson, the Ferguson killing. And I was still a police officer during that time. And, we would say in our city, like, well, you can't say that we're racist against blacks. There ain't any black people in our town. It's all Hispanic. We don't encounter them. We don't deal with them. How can you say that we're racist against black people? And so I can see how some conservatives would say, like, well, look, my town's all white. We're homogenous. And so the police department gets, is part of the community. The community's homogenous. Of course, we all get along. That may be true. I also happen to know there's a lot of towns that cars full of black people don't want to drive through because the communities are so homogeneously white that those officers don't have a lot of experience dealing with black people and might have, preconceived notions from the media and whatever other training that they're getting. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than just big city, small city. It just may be that some officers are not interacting with other races very much.
I gotcha. So what initially drew you to start working in law enforcement?
I grew up pretty conservative. I grew up in Orange County, which is a very conservative enclave in Southern California. Grew up fundamentalist Christian and evangelical Christian, and so I just came out of a very, God, mom, and apple pie kind of upbringing that revered law enforcement. And my dad had always wanted to be a cop his whole life and really looked up to police officers. And he actually became a cop when I was a teen. He got into law enforcement pretty late for him, and he went into the police academy and he lost all this weight and he started swearing and he came back talking about guns all the time. And I was just like, wow, it's so cool. My dad like got all tough. And I just remember being really, I don't know, jazzed. He seemed like he was having a lot of fun. And I thought, maybe I'll try that. Maybe I'll go in for that. And that's kind of how I got into it.
Gotcha. I have a list of questions. My roommate was the one that showed me this, and he just like machine gun sent me some questions if when I asked him if he had any questions. And a lot of these questions are ones that I had too. While I was thinking about how, because this is I don't do interviews very often. While I was thinking of these, I think that the bulk of this for me is trying to get some sort of insight into what kinds of reforms do you think are reasonable to happen, or not well, I say reasonable to happen, that are reasonable, given the fact that Republicans are probably going to hold the Senate. But what kind of reforms do you think are reasonable that won't put off a whole bunch of people, that will still do good, that will still have an effect of change in either the culture of police or in the outcome of police encounters?
Sure. If you watch my most recent video, I kind of put it out there that I'm a police and prison abolitionist. So, kind of where I start from is thinking like, okay, if my ultimate goal is, a post-police, post-prison society, what are all the steps that we would have to take to get there? Obviously, we can't flip a switch and do it overnight. That wouldn't work. So, when I think of the things that I think we could do today, you hear a lot of pushback now against the slogan defund the police. A lot of kind of white centrists are saying, oh no, they don't really mean that. No, it's really it's actually, that's terrible marketing. And we do mean that. Police department budgets are huge in certain cities. I think was it NYPD's police budget is larger than the Ukrainian military budget. It's like,
Jesus.
so like there's a lot of money that could be diverted towards social programs now without just completely, taking all the cops off the street, taking all the guns away, taking all the cop cars out. We can do things like reduce police budgets and reallocate that money towards mental health services, social services, things like that. In my most recent video, I mentioned that Eugene, Oregon put together a program called Cahoots, where they said, okay, if somebody calls the police and it doesn't sound like it's a violent encounter, instead of sending a cop with a gun on his hip, we're going to send an EMT and a social worker who are both trained in conflict resolution. And we're just going to send them and see what they can do. And the program's been around for a long time. It's very popular and it's very successful. I believe in the most recent year that we have stats for, I think Cahoots handled something like 20,000 calls for service and only had to call for law enforcement backup in 195 cases, something like that.
Oh, wow.
So the vast majority of things that they were sent to, they were able to kind of, talk people down. They were trained in de-escalation. They were trained in how do we resolve this conflict without violence? And it was very successful, and they united people with the resources that they needed. You know, a lot of people that are sort of in the criminal kind of zone of behavior, they're in some kind of crisis, whether it's a financial crisis, mental health crisis, drug addiction, health, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, a lot of the things that I was sent to when I was a cop didn't necessarily need to be handled by, you know, state violence. You
Right.
know, a lot of these people needed resources. They needed someplace to go. They need, hey, I'm stuck on the street. I'm in a desperate situation. You know, I worked in LA County, and all the beds were full, and all of our local homeless shelters. So I think if you started to take away police budgets for things like these, you know, all these police agencies that are buying tanks and LRADs and,
Yeah.
you know, all these monster machinery that they're deploying against protesters, if we maybe stopped them from buying weapons of war and bought more beds and affordable housing and affordable health care and affordable mental health care, I think you would see reductions in crime, reductions in violence, and reductions in police incidents. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I think is attainable today.
Yeah. I think I read something uh, while reading through different research documents, trying to make sure that I wasn't talking out of my ass while the protests were going on. Most of the time, it seems like when police are armed with these like military style equipment, they're a lot more gung ho when it comes to interacting with people. When police have, you know, just their regular equipment on them, they're more likely to try and de-escalate. They're more likely to try and resolve it non-violently. But you put a bunch of motherfuckers in, you know, essentially like modern day fucking plate armor and send them out against a bunch of angry people. They feel like they're you know, there to beat ass, you know.
Well, yeah, and if you let someone buy an armored personnel carrier, they're going to want to drive it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't fault them for that. I would also want to drive it. I just don't think that you know, maybe in that area we should have it. So another question that I had is when it comes to your everyday police officer who notices that there are issues going on, like there's some sort of corruption, or for lack of a better word, like shitty behavior happening in their department, right? Is there really any recourse for them to do anything themselves, or is this such a large systemic process that it's either conform or get out?
Yeah, you know, one of the traps that I fall into when I'm talking about law enforcement in my experience is sometimes I don't give enough respect to the fact that there are officers who it does really bother them when they see bad behavior. It does really bother them when they hear racist comments. I knew plenty of cops that couldn't stand guys that were, you know, heavy-handed, beating people up. Couldn't stand guys that, you know, talked bad about women and stuff on the job. And it's like they're out there. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say there are, you know, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of police officers that genuinely are perturbed by some of the things that they see other officers doing. The problem is law enforcement culture from the top down is anti-snitching, anti-ratting, and you will get socially punished if people think you're a rat. And you may, in some agencies, experience really bad consequences. I knew of agencies where it was understood that if you rat another officer out, the next time you're out and you get accosted by 5 gang members and you're by yourself and you call for help, that help is going to hit a lot of red lights on the way to come help you. And they might hit a train and, oh my God, I'm so sorry, we're going to be an extended, you know, just hang in there. Hope you're okay by yourself. Like, and that's one of the ways that culturally you are sort of enticed not to do that because you might, it's implied you might die.
Yeah.
Help might
Jesus
not
Christ.
come when you ask. And I knew of sergeants, lieutenants, captains who, when people would reveal things that they had seen to the upper command, those people also hated rats and would in turn rat out the rat to the other officers so that they could be punished or whatever. So it's not even just like, oh, all the line level guys don't want accountability, but the brass does. Not ones I knew. And so it's tough. Something has to be really, really egregious. I was going to say to most police departments' credit, when something like a rape occurs, that tends to get handled regardless of, that's one of the things that even police officers won't abide rape and sexual assault. I say that on the same day that just came out in Louisville, two officers that are accused of having illegal sex with underage police cadets got covered up at Louisville Police Department. So I guess it's not true of every police department, but I worked with an officer for a long time in a neighboring city that he got found out raping somebody on duty, and he got ratted out, and he actually went to jail. So it does happen, but it has to be something so egregious or so beyond the pale that other officers will do it. But your random kind of racial stuff and planting of evidence and things like that, just no one's gonna get involved because nothing happens. Nothing will happen to the guy that you rat,
Yeah.
and a lot of things will happen to you.
Did you see a lot of evidence planting while you were on the force?
There's one incident that I can recall. What I saw a lot of, or rather, what I heard a lot of, was guys bragging about it after the fact, or bragging, sort of just shooting the shit. But there was an incident that I remember where I arrested somebody who had been. They were drunk and disorderly at a hamburger restaurant, and when we tried to get him out of the restaurant, he wanted to fight us and started trying to fight with us, and so we got into a use of force, beat the guy up, took him to jail, and I distinctly remember searching this guy, and he didn't have anything on him. And while we were processing him at the jail, one of our gang officers came in and says, "Hey, I'm going to interview this guy real quick by myself." Took the guy into the other room, came back and said, "Hey, I found this on him," and he pulled up a bag of meth. And I saw the guy's face when he saw what was happening, and I know a lot of guys will say, "Oh, that's not mine. That isn't mine." But like, I saw someone's face, and I saw his crushed expression that like this guy was lying, and no one was gonna help him,
Jesus.
and no one was gonna
Christ.
believe him. You know what I mean? And so it's like,
Yeah.
do I know for certain? Like, would I swear in a court of law that evidence was planted? I can't say for certain, but in my heart, I know it was, because I saw that guy's face and I knew the character of the officer that did that, and I was like, fucking, are you kidding me? And it's like, I was so mad that I was put in that position, because again, it was a situation where it's like, I would have happily ratted this dude out. I didn't like him. I don't like planting evidence. I never did it myself. I didn't support it. I don't like cheating. I don't like lying like that. But I knew the minute if I went to my sergeant and said, "Well, I think this guy planted evidence," he'd say, "Oh, did you see it?" "Well, I didn't see it." "Oh, so you're just going to accuse this officer and ruin his career over something you didn't see?" And then I'd be fucked. So there was nothing I could do, or it felt like there was nothing I could do.
Yeah. I have a question from chat. What are most officers' views on internal affairs?
Not favorable.
Not favorables?
No, I mean, there are plenty of officers that respect the administrative, hierarchies and things like that. And there are plenty of officers that don't support corruption and things like that. But at least in the area that I worked, which was, we would have called it kind of a Wild West agency, because we were very, very busy and very, just a lot of action and stuff like that. The cultural sense of internal affairs is that they were out to get you, that they were out to either entrap you, or they were there to get you on little small things, and they were there to
Make your job
waste your
harder.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were out on the street you were doing the tough stuff. You were out the thin blue line between order and chaos, and these fucking pencil pushers, and what do they know? And it's stupid because there is a lot of corruption in law enforcement, and someone should be handling that. And I knew officers that were in internal affairs and stuff like that, and it really wasn't gotcha stuff.
Right.
It was legitimate things but yeah, culturally, no, I mean, nobody likes to be accountable, really, but
Yeah.
police officers especially do not like being told what to do.
Oh no, for sure. Let's see. Um, I'm not asking that one, Jay Leet. Yeah, no. I when it comes to like evidence planting, I know that there was one really really big case of that where an officer was planting meth on people constantly. I think it was like 100 convictions in Florida, and that it was right around the time when I think this is, if I'm getting my time right, this is right around the time where I was starting to be pushed further left and into this. I don't know if I can quite call myself a cab yet, because I feel like ascribing to the individual the problems of an entire system feels kind of wrong. But it was right around that time. What is your opinion on like ACAB? All cops are bastards. Fuck them all.
Yeah, I've been known to tweet the old ACAB hashtag every now and again, and it, I think it's valid for someone to say, hey, not every cop plants evidence. Not every cop is racist. For as much as I talk about the ills and excesses of law enforcement, we also did a lot of really good things.
Right.
You know what I mean? We did save people's lives from time to time. We did put ourselves in danger for the good of the public. That did happen. Not as much as TV and propaganda would lead you to believe, but it did happen. But yeah, I think I'm also we call it a systems thinker, a hierarchy thinker, and so when I say all cops are bastards, the way that I mean it is that the system is the bastard,
Right.
The unjust hierarchy, the unjust application of power is the bastard, and to the extent that no cops will rat on that system, no cops will hold that system accountable. It's something that when I get into arguments online with people and they say, not all cops are, my uncle's a cop and he's the nicest guy I know. I was asking him, okay, how many guys did your uncle rat out in his career? Was it zero? I bet it was zero. So it's like, you're right that an individual can be very good and very kind. And I knew guys that were extremely charitable. They would buy food for homeless people. They would, a kid would get caught shoplifting and they would pay the bill because he was shoplifting food for his family or whatever. Like, I knew guys that did that. I've done that. But I always upheld the status quo. And I think the status quo is a real bastard. And so it doesn't really matter what I individually think and what a nice guy that I am. If the system is oppressing people and I don't do anything about it, I'm part of it. I'm in on it. And that may not sound fair, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Right. So when it comes to the whole defund the police thing, so like Joe Biden has a plan that increases the funding to police for training and on when to use excessive force and I guess like sensitivity training. I don't know exactly what the different trainings are, but I don't know if that is the best option. I'm fairly certain that he said that he was going to reverse the Trump reverse of Obama's executive order that got rid of the military equipment in police departments. Do you think that just trainings and increased oversight is an acceptable kind of midway point between defund the police and where we're at now, or is this just kind of band-aid application?
Yeah, I was attended a lot of trainings in law enforcement, and for about half of my career, I was a trainer of hand-to-hand combat at a department. So I've been on both sides of giving and receiving the training, and I can tell you, police officers are not fun to train. We're real assholes in training, especially if it's boring or we don't care about it or whatever. I remember when I was in, it started to become a big issue that police officer. I say it started to become. It was always a big issue, but it started to become noticed that police officers were getting into a lot of uses of force with people that had some kind of mental illness. And so the California Peace Officer Standards and Training Bureau mandated all of this training about here's how to deal with people having a mental health crisis. Here's how to deal with somebody with a mental disability or something like that. And we were texting on our phones the whole time and just, screwing off and making fun of the training. The sergeant would put in the DVD and he'd go, all right, we got to listen to this stupid DVD today. So we would eat dinner and he'd put in the DVD and we'd play grab ass, and stuff like that. And we didn't take it seriously because we didn't have to.
Right.
The training, if if you're not being evaluated on it, if the boss doesn't care, you don't care. And we were not evaluated on it. We were not held accountable. We would watch that training and go right back out and do all the same, heavy-handed shit that we were always doing. So when I hear someone saying, "Oh, the police need more training," I'm like, really? That's just yet more time for them to play grab ass at the station and not care about it. And my issue is that the problems are cultural. In my first police officer video, I talked about Dave Grossman, who's a well-regarded law enforcement trainer. He's the guy that came up with the sheeps, wolves, and sheepdogs analogy. If you ever hear a cop call himself a sheepdog, that's what that came from. And his whole thing is reducing your inhibition towards violence. His whole opinion is that the biggest problem in law enforcement is that too many officers aren't ready to kill. Aren't violent enough, and that's an officer safety issue. When I was coming up in the police academy, they said, the number one thing is officer safety. You go home at the end of your shift, fuck the other guy. And we had a quote, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6, meaning I'll take my chances in front of a jury than take my chances putting my life in danger for someone else. So culturally, if that doesn't change, no training in the world is going to handle that. And so I think, more oversight. Sure, great. I think civilian oversight would be a big thing, but I think even civilians are really susceptible to propaganda. When you turn on your local network television, it's half cop shows all the time. All people see is cop shows and cops doing cop things, and they're all, oh, aren't they so great?
Yeah, and then you see these cops are blowing people's fucking cars up in these like 80s buddies film, and I don't think that's by the book. And you see these movies where they'll explicitly say that I'm a cop that doesn't play by the book. All right, I ain't fucking around. And then I wonder how much that really plays into their culture. Like, do they see themselves as Sylvester Stallone or?
Well, it's when I was in the force and a lot afterwards, you'll notice that a lot of police officers have Punisher logos all over all their shit. The Punisher, the friendly community-oriented superhero.
Yeah, no, seriously. Let me see here. How do you feel about the extremely short training programs for U.S. police, as opposed to training programs in other countries? I feel like what I've heard, this was a question from chat, but I feel like what I have heard is that the training is something like 9 months, and the majority of that is target practice and judo. So is that accurate or?
Yeah, so when I went to the academy, it was in it was in California at the time where the requirement to get your police officer certificate was 1,010 hours. And so that tended to be either a 5 to 6 month full-time academy or a 10-month part-time academy, which was what I did. The bulk of what we did tended to be physical training, yeah, hand-to-hand combat, running laps, calisthenics, things like that. We did a lot of firearms training, and then kind of learning legal codes and memorizing legal codes and stuff like that, and going through the California Penal Code and the Vehicle Code. And it was a lot of the stuff that wasn't physical, the stuff that wasn't fighting or shooting, tended to be very procedural. You know, okay, if you go out on a crime scene, here's what you do, and here's how to find the elements of a crime and stuff like that. We did very, very, very little training on human psychology, diffusing a situation, de-escalating tough circumstances. I remember, I think our module when we talked about community policing, it was like the first one we had in the academy. So it's like they got it out of the way on like week 2, and then the rest of it was just technical procedural stuff. So the funny thing was that where I did my police academy, we were right next door to a I don't know, is beauty school still the right word? I don't know if that's an outdated term, a cosmetology school.
Yeah.
And they had to do more hours of training to cut hair than we had to do to become a police officer. We all graduated before the cosmetology school did.
Jesus Christ, that's pretty bad. This isn't like an important question, but like if there's so much like calisthenics and physical training at the beginning, why are there so many cops that are just like big fat motherfuckers? Because like, is that like, do you have to like continue that, or?
No, that's why all you have to do is pass the academy one time and you get your police officer ticket or your police officer certificate. And most agencies do not have any kind of continuing physical fitness stuff. The police unions are very strong, and I think it's technically part of like I don't know if it's part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, if they've kind of finagled that to say that, well, okay, well, someone can't lose their job because they can't do a pull-up. But yeah, you really have to be in shape to get in, and then after that you can and you can be whatever your normal body type is if you want.
So fuck me. I just missed it because someone's trolling in chat saying Trump 2020 baby. Yeah. So I know in your video you talked about this, but when it came to dealing with minorities, I know that you said that the majority in the area that you were working was Hispanic, but did you notice a difference in the way that cops treated white people and the way that they treated minorities? I know that, well, I can tell my little anecdotal story after you answer, but I learned at a very early age that if the way that my first real police encounter went, the way that I acted, if I was like a black kid, I don't think I would be I would not be alive right now.
Yeah, so the area that I worked was pretty low income, and so even the white people that we ran into tended to be, the ones that we would run into in the course of our duties would be drug addicts or homeless people or people having a mental health crisis. So kind of all the same issues and stuff like that, and so. In that sense, we didn't really tend to treat white people differently versus Hispanic people. I did encounter a lot of white people that thought they were going to get treated better because they were white. I remember some skinheads rolled through town one time, and I think they were going to a party or something like that, and they were causing trouble somewhere, and we went to go kind of defuse the situation and get rid of these guys. They were going to start a fight. Amazingly, the skinheads were not well behaved in this predominantly minority city. And so we were going there to get them out of there, and these skinheads were convinced that the police were on their side, and they kept needling me and saying weird stuff. I remember this one phrase this guy kept using. He was like, he was talking bad about whoever, and he was just saying like, this guy knows what time it is, and he was neat like, he kept saying, I know what time this guy knows what time it is. Like, he knows what's up. He's one of us. And I remember thinking like, motherfucker, I'm not one of you. Like, I hate skinheads way worse than I hate these people. They way worse than I hate gangsters. But I can tell you that the black people that rolled through town did get treated a lot worse than even the Hispanic people did.
Wow.
There was a distinct extra layer of, if not hostility, then defensiveness, I guess you would call it. Like, when on the rare occasions that black people would come through town or come to a party, we even had a few black families in town. When we were dealing with black people in a law enforcement capacity, they got a very heavy hand from just the general officer, and as if they were extra dangerous, I guess you would say. And the officer, oh, I'm just being safe. I'm not. It's not about race. But I distinctly remember.
Yeah. I remember. So the first time that I had a police encounter, besides like getting a ticket. You know what? At this point, I was only 17 years old. I was just about to go into college. I think that I hadn't even gotten a ticket at this point, and me and my friends were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we went to Pizza Hut to get some pizza. And when we had pulled into the parking spot, a cop pulled up behind us and turned on his lights, and proceeded to one by one pull all of me and my very, very, like, we were not dangerous looking people. But one by one took everyone out of the car, gave them a pat down, and everyone else was absolutely mortified, but I was pissed because, I was the dungeon master, and I really wanted to get back to the very last. It was our last session before we went off to college, and boy, I was so pissed. And I don't have to go into all the grisly things that I said to them, but I did call the main cop Porky multiple times, not because he was a cop, but because he was a larger individual, and he by the end of the hour and a half that we had that stop, there were 8 cop cars and tons of cops just tearing my friend's car apart because my friend was nervous when he came and knocked on our window. He also didn't knock on the driver's window first. He knocked on mine because I was sitting behind the driver. I don't know if that's like a normal thing, but
Yeah, if there's a car full of people, we were trained not to walk. You don't want somebody behind you, so we would only walk to the back door and do it that way.
okay, gotcha. Yeah, because he knocked on my window and I rolled it down. And he asked me, he's like, "Your friend's window not work?" I was like, "Fuck if I know, dude. Like, ask him." But yeah, no. But the way that I was just, I mean, I was in the wrong for the way that I was just verbally abusing these guys. But if I had been a black kid, holy shit, I'd be dead. Like, they just separated me from everyone else, But that was when I first kind of fully grasped the idea of like white privilege and of the difference in how white people are treated differently than other races by cops,
Yeah, because of where I worked and just kind of the racial particularities of it, for us, we would make snap judgments about whether you were a normal dude or a shitbag. Like that was the word we use all the time, shitbag. And so like we would make these snap judgments. So that would come down to how you were dressed, what you look like, where you were coming from. But yeah, I mean, sometimes we would pull somebody over, and another officer would come up and go, "Hey, you need help?" And I go, "No, it's just a normal dude," and stuff like that. So we would make those kinds of decisions about people, and I think Hispanic youths, Hispanic teens, black teens tended not to get seen as just normal dudes at the same rate that like a white teen would. They in our brains they were coded as possibly being gang related or whatever. So yeah, it definitely does happen.
Yeah. By the end of that hour and a half, the reason that they had pulled us over in the first place was because my friend's headlight was out. Um, so they pulled us over um, after we had already parked. That was luckily the first and only time I've been patted down by police. I think I'd be a lot more sober in my approach to talking to them now. There were some other questions here in chat. One person asked, was there a single event that pulled you out of, that like pushed you out of being a cop, or was it just kind of the overall culture, or was it just like a timing thing?
Yeah, I actually I left law enforcement not because I was tired of it, but I was living in California and I wanted to move out of state. And I met somebody online that I was dating long distance in another state. And so I quit my job and moved to that other state to go be with them. And in that state, I was not able to get another cop job because I didn't have a degree. In California, you didn't need one, but in this state, you really did. And so I was not able to get back into law enforcement in that state. And then I got involved in other career and ended up in, digital marketing and web design and user experience stuff. And after I'd gotten out of law enforcement for a while, I was like, I don't need to go back.
Yeah.
I never got shot. I never got sued. I had, about a decade of fun, good war stories. I'm just gonna, stay out of the business. And then it wasn't until much later that I started to get really into police abolition work and prison abolition stuff like that. It was very late that because it really is like a cult. Like it really is like a cult that you don't know that you're in, and so you have all these views about the world that you don't even realize. Like the fish doesn't even realize that they're wet, kind of thing. And so it wasn't until I was way outside of it that people would come and go, "Hey, this is wrong. How can you support this? And how can you were a cop? This is terrible." And I'd be like, "Yeah, you're right. That is terrible. I never thought about it."
That's a little fucked up. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and you feel stupid. Like I felt stupid. Like I was like, "How did I never notice this when I was in?" Like, and then there was stuff when I was, late in my career when I stopped being such a cowboy. I started to kind of mellow out halfway through my career and tried to be a little bit more community minded and stuff like that. And it was planting the seeds that the problems in my city were structural and poverty and mental health and healthcare related, and not because half the citizens were evil.
Right.
It started to occur to me that like, oh, these are people that need help. These are people that need resources. They're not getting the resources that they need. And that was something that started to occur to me kind of late in my career. And it was only when I was well outside of it that I thought, oh, wow, that's capitalism, baby. Oh man. Like I just never, it wasn't until I got into leftist politics that I sort of started to fit the pieces all together, I guess. Like how the excesses of policing fit to poverty, that fit to capitalism, that fit to colonialism, that fit to all these different things.
Yeah. I think that certainly there's kind of like in the US, there's this intrinsic trust of police, which in a perfect world wouldn't be a bad thing, but everyone's you grow up and you look at like Richard Scarry's books with the little cats and stuff, and they're dressed as little cops, and you're like, oh, look at that, I'd want to be a cop, and they talk about being a cop in elementary school, and it's just something that people get used to and kind of accept. It really wasn't until I was I mean, even when I was kind of getting into leftist politics a little bit early in college. Well, I say leftist, being more outspoken as a liberal, watching Jon Stewart and stuff talking about fuck me, I can only think of I can only think of Kenosha, the one that happened in Missouri that we referenced earlier, with
Ferguson.
Ferguson. Thank you. Yeah, with that whole thing, and the arguments that I got into with my then girlfriend, who was very conservative, about, like, maybe we can just do some like very simple things, like maybe we can get body cameras, and she would say, well, how are we gonna pay for that? Maybe not let them buy fucking tanks. And then it was, a fucking all night fight from there. So I have just a couple more questions, a couple from chat and then a couple from me. What would you say was the extent of your training on handling people with mental illnesses, neurological conditions, stuff like that? Like, and they referenced cops shooting like a young autistic boy having a meltdown, right? What would you say is the average cop's ability to deal with that sort of thing?
Yeah, and thinking back on the police academy, I can think of almost no specific training about mental health issues like that, mental illness issues like that. There may have been some mention of it, but I don't recall that being a big part of the curriculum. I recall that coming out when I had been on for about 2 or 3 years, coming like I said, mandated from the state, and the extent of that was like a 1-hour DVD that we had to watch every 6 months, and it was the one that I remember was like it had 3 different scenarios of officers responding to somebody that had either a mental illness or some kind of a disability. I just remember one of them was somebody with cerebral palsy that the officer thought they were drunk because of the way that their speech was slurred or whatever. And one of the like 15-minute little chapters was on, I guess it would have been autism. I don't know if the video called it autism. I don't know if it was that sophisticated at the time. This would have been around, I don't know, early 2000s, something like that. But it was the classic scenario of an autistic person in their front yard, having a reaction, overstimulated or whatever, and the mom in the front yard screaming at the police officers, he's not dangerous, please don't, that was that kind of classic scenario. And so we were exposed to that concept, I guess, that autistic people can, an autistic person or somebody with some other kind of situation going on could be overstimulated, could be having a meltdown, and they're not trying to hurt anybody. They just need to be calmed down or soothed or whatever. But we were not given the tools to do that, I guess. And we were not given the training to know how to do that. We were just told, hey, this could happen, so think about that.
Yeah.
And so, like, we had county mental, right? Yeah. And we had county mental health people that we could call that were always overburdened and overbooked. And, oh yeah, we'll be there in 2 hours, if maybe. But the problem is that in law enforcement, officer safety comes first. And so if we're out there to keep the peace and an officer perceives a threat from somebody that is having this kind of episode, it really doesn't matter that we were trained, he's not a criminal, he might just have it doesn't matter, because we were trained that officer safety comes first, and the officer will do whatever he feels like he needs to do to, as they would say, contain the threat. And so, and I know it's really dangerous in communities of color, and particularly in the Black community, because Black people are seen as inherently more violent. And so what would seem like a mental health episode in a white person gets perceived of as, he's freaking out, we've got to do something. And so,
they also don't
we were
have the
trained
resources to like the people themselves don't have the resources to adequately treat any kind of conditions, or to like a lot of more affluent white neighborhoods would show that person is autistic, like having a nurse with them or something like that. So
and so yeah, it's just if you again, it goes back to your question about training. Like you can give all the training in the world, but if the society is not oriented around helping, if society is oriented around peacekeeping and retribution, then all the training in the world isn't going to help when a officer who is a C student in high school and had less training than the cosmetology school shows up with a gun and a pepper spray and he sees
Yeah.
somebody having a meltdown in front of him. It just doesn't. There's nothing. No amount of training is going to help that.
What do you think of this? Is not one of the listed questions I have, but what do you think of the stereotype that a lot of cops are just high school bullies that ended up going into police work because they were, power trippers?
There were. That was definitely a big part of people that I worked with in law enforcement. I would say, it was about 40% former bullies. I would say it was, 40%. If you think of your classic, like Eagle Scout, your classic, like, I just love this country and I love, it was a lot of veterans, a lot of people that I think really, in their own way, wanted to serve the community and serve the country in their own way. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the way that it, they were doing it, but there are a lot of people that I would call, not bullies, but like principled,
Patriots or something like that. Yeah.
guardian types.
Yeah, I gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I guess what let me see if I've missed anything. I think that the last thing that I want to touch on, something that we can close out on, is what do you think? What kinds of things in our current discourse do you think are damaging the movement for police reform? Like, is there anything that people are outwardly saying that isn't really helping the case for fixing these problems? Or are there any better ways to message it that even like maybe a cop would get behind, or the majority of people that might support cops would get behind?
It's an interesting question. In the last few days, particularly since the election, there's a lot of like centrist Democrats that lost their seats or almost lost their seats. They're like, "Boy, defund the police" slogan really fucked me.
Yeah.
Like, no, it didn't. You being a moderate squish fucked you, but there's a lot of people that want to blame that slogan because they say, "Oh, the average person is not going to respond to that." And I disagree only because it's a provocative slogan. And when you say something like, I believe we should defund the police, it's shocking to our society. But I think in a way that is, I mean, the first time I heard it, I was like, what, are you fucking kidding me? Like, and do what? But
Yeah.
it demanded to hear somebody intelligent and sober and maybe somebody that you respect or somebody that you admire or even just somebody that you don't think is a crackpot, to hear somebody say, I think we should defund the police, it demands that you engage with that. You might not agree with it. You might hear them out and not agree with their conclusions, but it's such a provocative thing to say in America right now that I think it demands engagement, and I think that's valuable. The thing that I try to watch out for when I'm making my videos about law enforcement and about abolition and really about any kind of leftist project is that I always try to remind myself that a lot of people have been indoctrinated into ideologies since they were tiny babies.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't just Tarzan in with one video and go, we got to defund the police. We got to smash capitalism. You bunch of fucking idiots. Don't you realize? Like, you can't smash.
You dumb fucks. Come on.
Yeah, go read a book. Read some theory. Like, you can't just swoop in and slogan your way out of 20 years of indoctrination. You've got to have a little bit of patience, and you've got to have a little bit of, I don't know if respect is the right word, but you have to acknowledge that if it took 20 years to build up these walls in people's heads, it's going to take more than 2 days to break them back down. And so I think those of us that are advocating for positions that seem radical, whatever that happens to be, I think we would do well to create spaces for people to engage with that where we're not acting like they're idiots because they didn't read the same books that we read. You know, like, I only just recently read Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Y. Davis. So the last thing I want to do is go, you fucking moron, you didn't read Angela Davis? Because I only read her like 6 months ago.
Right.
Like, am I gonna act like I've read all the books right away? And so I think what we can do is just have a little bit of grace for people. We're all on a different path. I think, you know, I mean, we're all on a different, you know, I come out of a marketing background, and we have a concept called the buyer's journey, where when you're trying to sell somebody a product, you know, some people don't even know that they need it yet. Some people don't know that they have a problem. Some people know that there's a problem and they don't know the solution. And some people know that solutions exist and they're evaluating solutions. And so if you are trying to sell someone a solution before they know they have a problem, you're at the wrong part of the buyer's journey, and they're not going to hear you because they say, why are you trying to sell me a vacuum? My house isn't dirty. And you got to be like, actually, your house is fucking filthy.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's something that I think leftism and these kinds of radical projects tend to have a marketing problem, where we don't always acknowledge that there are different stages in the buyer's journey, and that it's okay. It's okay that people aren't all the way there yet, and we need to sometimes dial the message back. And so to answer your question about, you know, what could we say to people that would get them more on board with police reform, even if they're cops or have cops in the family? I think the way that I'm phrasing it right now, or the way that I'm trying to sell that idea right now, is to say, look, when I was a cop, the vast majority of things that I was sent to did not demand a violent response. It needed empathy, it needed compassion, and people needed resources. And so if you really love cops, if you really love your uncle who's a cop, if you really love your brother who's a cop, wouldn't you rather that they spend their time, you know, more productively, or, you know what I mean? Wouldn't you rather they spend their time actually getting rid of, you know, there's, oh, what about the murderers and the rapists? Great. Let's free up their time to go find the murderers and the rapists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And wouldn't,
yeah, go for it.
yeah, that, and wouldn't you rather society had the tools that prevented crime in the first place? If you're really concerned about officer safety, and look, I don't want police officers to get shot and killed in the line of duty. You know what I mean? Like, even me as an abolitionist, I'm not advocating for police ambushing and murders and things like that. I don't want any cops to die. I don't want any citizens to die. But, like, if you're really concerned about officer safety, then you should be concerned about the kinds of societies that create the kinds of people that would kill a cop. And those tend to be societies that don't have the resources, don't have the mental health care, don't have the compassion and the empathy to, you know, prevent those kinds of things. So wouldn't it be better to create a society where nobody wanted to kill a cop? And the only way that we're going to do that is not going to come from giving cops bazookas and laser guns. It's going to come from creating community resources that pull people out of crisis so that they don't act out in ways that put police in danger.
Yeah, and see, like, me and my roommate, we started this stream. I mean, I still have, like, the original messaging, like I said at the beginning of this, but one of the overarching themes of what both me and him have been trying to do is make sure that there's a better dialogue going on between people. I mean, there's always room for the occasional dunk on someone that wants to come on stream, and that's always fun. But in general, I try and make sure that when I'm talking to someone that disagrees with me, but wants the same outcome, I'm trying to explain to them kind of like what you were saying, like, in the neighborhood that I grew up in, if someone's dog got out of their backyard, we didn't have an animal control for this small suburb. It was the cops that were called, right? Wouldn't it be better to free up their time, create additional resources outside of that, right? Make their jobs easier so they can focus on the actual problems, like actual violent crime, getting to scenes of a murder or something like that in a timely manner. Wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you want their job to be easier and not cluttered up with bullshit? Make sure that they are adequately equipped with the knowledge of how to deal with any given situation. Make sure that they are invested in the community that they're policing, stuff like that. And for the most part, I get positive positive responses to that. It really comes down to the fundamental. All right, now the way that we make their job easier is we've got to fix the source of the problem that creates the crime in the first place, and then it's like, oh well, fuck it, you know. So I think that that's a huge barrier in this, but I think that what you were saying is right, in regards to the defund the police thing, and in regards to how we message like this. The defund the police is a shocking statement, right? But it actually forces people to actually engage with your idea, right? I think my only problem with it is that a lot of people have a lot of different definitions of what defunding the police means. But other than that, I think that I largely agree with you on what you said. Well, hey, my guy, this has been really interesting. I would love to have you back on the channel some other time, because I have not encountered anyone that will explain police abolition to me that when they don't just say, they're cops, fuck them, So, yeah. If you're down for that, I'd love to have you on again. And
this is fun. This is great.
Yeah, 100%. Go ahead and shout out your YouTube channel and any plug that you want to do at the end here.